This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Come get your whooping. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it. Gets caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, get it, touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle, caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet, touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, and welcome to this week's edition of Michigan Podcast. I am Steve Deace, and you know, there's a ton I could say about the stretch of games we have just seen pulled off by our beloved Michigan Wolverines, concluding with one of the worst curb stomps behind the woodshed beatdowns you'll ever see against Penn State, 42-7 on Saturday, and I'm not even sure it was that close, but instead of me just kind of sitting here pontificating, eloquating, how about we just look at some actual data? I want to give you a rundown of just numbers that I think will largely speak for themselves. Michigan is the first team to beat ranked opponents in 3 straight games in the Big Ten since Michigan did it in its 1997 national title season. That's some pretty good company. Here's your updated Big Ten yards per play differential per game. Michigan is now a full yard better than any other team in this league, meaning every time a ball is snapped, even if the other team has the ball, Michigan is gaining more than 2.5 yards. That's phenomenal. Last year, Penn State outrushed Michigan by 121 yards. This year, the Wolverines outrushed Penn State by 191 yards. Is that good? How about this? Last year, Penn State's Trace McSorley posted a QBR, quarterback rating, 60 points higher than Michigan's John O'Korn in this matchup. This year, Michigan's Shea Patterson posted a QBR 78 points higher than McSorley. That's insane. Oh, so is this stat. Over its past 3 games, Michigan held Alex Hornibrook, Brian Lewerke, and Trace McSorley, all starting quarterbacks who beat Michigan last season, to 17 of 58 passing. That's 29%, 249 yards, barely 4 yards an attempt, and a combined passer rating of 60.72. That's a felony in some states. Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State on third downs versus Michigan this season, a combined 4 for 34. Is that bad? I think that's very bad. Unless you're wearing the winged helmet, then it is very good. Michigan outscored Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State by a score of 101-27, guys. 101-27. Revenge is a dish. Best served cold. Michigan has won every game at home this year by at least 21 points. This is just some incredible dominance by the Wolverines. According to Sagarin's ratings, the two most dominant wins this season in a matchup of top 10 teams. Number 1, Alabama by number 29 over number 8, LSU, 8 in the Sagarin ratings. Number 4, Michigan by 35 over 7th in the Sagarin ratings, Penn State. Yards per play average differential per game with Sagarin's strength of schedule rating in parentheses. So these are right now the teams that are considered the 5 teams with their destinies in their hands for the college football playoff. You see Clemson there at plus 3.9 against the 34th toughest schedule. But here's what you need to know. They largely built this off the backs of their last 2 blowout wins over Florida State and Louisville, who have basically given up the season. Alabama plus 3.76 against the 60th toughest schedule. And then Michigan plus 2.65 against the toughest schedule on this list. Better than Georgia, better than Notre Dame. Michigan is allowing 3.73 yards per play. That would be the best by any defense in college football in at least 7 years. Alabama in 2011. And then this is remarkable. Drew Hallett at the Wolverines, Zach Shaw at 247 Sports and others. Thank you for coming up for some of these facts. But this profile, look at the scoring defense right now. 5th, total defense 1st, yards per play 1st, rushing defense 8th, yards per carry 5th, passing defense 1st, yards per attempt tied for 1st, passer rating 1st. Folks, can I add a couple of bonus picks? Let me give you a couple of bonuses. Michigan has more yards rushing in the last 3 games against ranked opponents than it gave up to them in total yardage by like 100 yards, actually. And then this might be my favorite stat of the college football season par excellence right now, all right? If you throw the ball against Michigan, it is more likely the Wolverines will get a pick 6 for a touchdown than you will throw for a touchdown. Now that's domination. I want to say thank you. We've landed several new Patreon supporters at Michigan Podcast since the season started. Thank you to those of you that are supporting us. And if you would like to, we want you to know that you get some exclusive content that we provide for you each week via Patreon, including my instant reaction post-game podcast, my picks for the Michigan game, pre-kickoff, and more. As a thank you to those of you that decide that you like what we do here at Michigan Podcast enough to support us at Patreon. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, and we're joined by my partner at Wolverine Digest, local host on WTKA Ann Arbor, Michael Spath. Good to see you, brother. You know, I just laid out in a little listicle to top off the show just the dominance that we have seen from Michigan football, the last 3 games in particular, but this season, the first half against Notre Dame in general. I know you had a stat this morning. I think it was something like if 5 of Michigan's opponents this year have gotten almost or more than half of their total yardage on the last drive of the game, when Michigan obviously was substituting liberally. So when you just take a step back at where this team is at right now and what it has done, the dismantlings of the last few weeks, Michael, what's kind of your big picture view of what we've just seen?
My big picture view is that it's really good to be a Michigan Wolverine right now. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's the defense is playing as well as any unit I've seen. I think this unit's playing better than the 2016 team. I'd have to go back to 2006. I thought that defense was really, really special. And then obviously we saw what happened against Ohio State. But no, I look at this performance right now, and it's really eye-opening, the different weapons that they have. And what's really interesting about this defense is that I don't think it's any one player. I mean, you go back to 97, and it was all the Charles Woodson show. And then years later, we gave credit to a lot of the great players like Glenn Steele and Dahani Jones and Sam Sword and Marcus Ray and all those other guys. But, I mean, you really pay attention to one man. And then this year, and in 2006, even you paid so much attention to Lamar Woodley. And then we went back and looked and we're like, oh, my God, David Harris and Sean Crable and Prescott Burgess and Leon Hall, how good they were. This year, there's just, I mean, we could talk about Chase Winovich, or you could talk about Devin Bush, but it really seems like you've got 11 guys and really kind of 15 or 16 guys because you've got a lot of different guys coming in as reserves. that are playing at an elite level right now, and that's pretty exciting to watch. And big picture is that Michigan football is in a spot that you got to believe is going to be sustainable. Zach Harrison, the 5-star out of Ohio, the defensive lineman, sounds like he might end up in Michigan. Kavarius Crouch might end up in Michigan. Michigan's already got a great recruiting class in 2019. And so when you look at the pieces that they have right now, how good the quarterback play has been, the development there, the development along the offensive line now with Ed Warner, you can be really excited not just for this season, but for the coming seasons as a Michigan football fan. And God, how night and day is that from where we were a year ago, Steve? That's what my biggest takeaway is that here we were a year ago, and Michigan coming off that Penn State game, and then losing Wisconsin and losing to Ohio State, and how miserable it was to be a Michigan football fan at the end of the 2017 season. And less than 12 months from that lowest of low point, we're at a very, very high point. We'll be able to enjoy it for at least 2 more weeks, and hopefully a Big Ten East Division title with a win over Ohio State and a Big Ten championship. And then we're talking college football playoff. And I think a couple years ago when Michigan had a chance at the college football playoff, a lot of things still had to go their way, and you weren't really sure it was going to happen. Right now, I think that you're truly believing that a college football playoff is what this team is destined for, and that's just a pretty awesome place to be as a fan.
I was listening to your show this morning and to some of the callers, and you and I were having a conversation over text as I was kind of reacting.
Yeah, thanks for texting me while I'm on the air, by the way.
I was just going to say, being a talk show host myself, I'm sure you'd think I'd be more sympathetic about providing my real-time commentary to a guy who's on the air, but alas, we're all hypocrites nowadays, so I apologize.
Well, the funny thing is my wife does it all the time, and she'll write even like after the third or fourth text, and she'll be like, hey, are you in the middle of something right now? And I'm like,
yes. Yeah, I hear you. So my bad. I shouldn't do that. I apologize. So I was listening to the conversation this morning, and if it wasn't just your show, I wouldn't have said anything, but this is happening elsewhere, talking about the offense. Mm-hmm. And I want to just issue this disclaimer. A more aggressive play calling to me is a legit criticism. I'm not talking about that. Like, you and I have been calling for hitting those tight ends in the red zone, like we saw them do against Penn State on Saturday. We've been having that conversation for like 8 weeks now, right? Okay. So I'm not talking about more aggression. I'm talking about the overall framework of the offense. And I think we Michigan fans need to take a step back here and realize where this program was at. And we came out of spring practice and didn't know whether the guy starting at quarterback right now was going to be eligible or not. Mm-hmm. All right. We switched coaches on multiple levels on the offensive side of the staff. We came into the year not knowing what the play calling chain of events was. The offensive line here, except for one season for a decade, has been a mixture of disappointment to hot mess. Last year's offense was essentially primordial ooze. What they have done here, for the number one thing they had to do was build an identity on offense. And they had to do it with a quarterback who's very talented, but came out of a dramatically different system. So little by little, they had to figure out when to morph and when not to, when to conform him to what we do and us to conform to him. We had to figure this out on the fly against what almost everybody in every preseason magazine thought was the toughest schedule in college football, or one of the 2 toughest going into the year. And then you had all these negative narratives and everything else. What they've accomplished this year, I go back to other seasons where Michigan had huge bounce backs from disappointments. And we talked about this in the offseason too. In 85, as great and fun as that season was, and Jim was the quarterback of that team, he had already won the starting job the year before. He had already won the team. He just got hurt. All right. That was a program that still had a lot of guys within it that had won a lot of big games and championships at Michigan. You look at the 97 team, the reason why that was such a disappointment is because this has been a program that prior to those 4 straight 4-loss seasons had won 5 Big Ten championships in a row. The 06 team had a lot of guys on it that won Big Ten titles in 03 and 04. So they're trying to build a championship culture with a bunch of guys who hadn't won anything here at all. And then at the same token, they've got to build an identity on offense with pieces that they weren't even sure how these were all going to fit. What they have done this season is nothing short of remarkable. The pace by which they brought this along, and having that defense, it's real easy to say be more aggressive. The reality is when you know that the odds of the other, when the other team throws a pass, there's a better chance your defense scores a touchdown than them. Why would you risk giving them the ball at the 30-yard line with a turnover when you know they're not going 80 yards? They're just not. I think we have played phenomenal complementary football. I think what you'll see, for example, like in a a college football playoff or Rose Bowl game with a lot of time off, I do think you'll see them with nothing else, with no injuries or anything to worry about for that game. Let it all hang out offensively and open it up more. But on the weekly grind, and you're playing all these tough teams, all these teams that are ranked, Zach Shaw, your partner, mentioned where all these teams are ranked in total defense this year. We have played masterful complementary football. We're doing what Ohio State has not been able to do this year. They've got all the big play explosiveness our fans want to have. They also don't tackle anybody. They had to change their offense this last week against Nebraska, got rid of the RPO to essentially go to more of a downhill running game, which by the way, not coincidentally, Dwayne Haskins had his worst throwing game of the entire season. Urban Meyer's trying to figure out how to play complementary football right now. Our coaches have mastered it against a much tougher schedule and with a lot more moving parts. I think this is one of the best coaching jobs we have ever seen in one season at Michigan.
No, you could be right. I think, honestly, what it comes down to, Steve, is that we've all been, as fans, we've been preconditioned a little bit to believe that if you're not throwing the ball 45 or 50 times a game, if you're not putting up Baker Mayfield-type numbers at Oklahoma, or what Deshaun Watson did at Clemson, or what Tua Tagovailoa is doing at Alabama right now, if you're not putting up video game stats, then somehow you don't have a very good offense. And, you mentioned this in one of the text messages you sent to me, and I thought a lot more about this. And what you have with Michigan's offense right now is you do have Alabama when A.J. McCarron was the quarterback of Alabama. Maybe 2012, 13, 2000, somewhere in that circa of Alabama, where they were bludgeoning teams with their offensive line, with their running game, and with the defense that was so incredible that if you got 14 points or you got 17 points against Alabama, you were considering yourself, well, that was a big-time win, whether you won the game or not. And I think that's what Michigan's offense and their entire team identity is about right now. And they might be a slight step behind Alabama and its efficiency when they were rolling there in the early part of Nick Saban's era. But I think that's what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do. And certainly Alabama has won that way. And when you look at what they've got right now, they've got a dynamic quarterback and they throw the ball downfield a little bit more. But if you can win the battle along the line of scrimmage with your offensive line, grinding teams down and then your defense just shutting teams down. The stat that to me that really popped was what Michigan's done in the fourth quarter against the last three opponents, against three teams that owned Michigan in the fourth quarter a year ago. In fact, last year, Michigan had 67 yards rushing against Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State in the fourth quarter. This year, 295 yards rushing, averaging 6 yards per carry.
Wow.
It's one of those things where, as fans, we're impatient. During the game, as a Twitter follower, I can kind of go up and down on a little bit of a roller coaster with my emotions. And in the first half, I get impatient and I want to score right now. I want the big plays right now. But if you take into scope the entire game that Michigan has played week after week, they're winning a four-quarter game. They might not be winning a first-quarter game, or they might not be winning a specific second-quarter game, but they're winning a four-quarter game, and they're taking control of the games in the second halves. And that's a type of offense that we're not used to, because we're used to watching the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and the SEC and just airing it out. But I think one of the things that was really stood out to me on Saturday was Alabama, the best scoring offense in the nation, both for a total game, for the first quarter, for the second quarter, against LSU, against a great LSU defense. They had 9 points late into the second quarter, and it shows you that defense neutralized offense. Eventually Alabama wore them down and LSU couldn't keep up. But if Michigan's defense were to match up with Clemson or Notre Dame or Alabama or in a couple weeks Ohio State, you got to believe that they can neutralize that first half, keep it close, and then, as they've done these last couple of weeks, win these games in the second half.
Not to mention, I go back when I was watching Pat Mahomes in week 1 of the NFL, and on the daily sports show I mentioned what impressed me about the performance he had is you can sandlot it up in the NFL for a while. You can Vince Young it, Robert Griffin III it, you can do it after a while, but then sooner or later, defensive coordinators in that league catch up to you, and you make your money as a quarterback by what you can do in the pocket. And what impressed me about Mahomes is he was making throws from the pocket that showed you this was not a flash in the pan. That like he could keep he could keep emulating this week in and week out, and we've seen that. He's the first quarterback in NFL history to, in his first 8 starts, throw for 25 touchdown passes and 300 yards in every single one. I bring that up in the context of what we're talking about here. What they've done this year at Michigan is they have finally built a brand of football that we can play from here. We may never have a defense as talented as the one that we have right now, although the way we're recruiting, I wouldn't say that that's not going to happen. But, middle linebackers like Devin Bush at this school don't come around all the time. You and I know that, right? So we may never see another Michigan defense that gives up fewer touchdown passes than pick sixes in a year. I think you had the stat that Brandon Watson, who's our nickel back, is the first defensive back in Michigan to have 2 pick sixes in a season since All-American Tom Darden in 1971. I wasn't even born. All right. So we may never, this is a style of complementary football. Some years, like I suspect next year, when most of this offense is back, including Shea, I think you'll see him have a far more prolific year, and the defense will be good, but not this dominant. And you'll see them, and then we'll be sitting here saying, why can't we get off the field like we did every time last year? And then the offense will complement the defense a little bit more. They are establishing a brand, an identity that we can now build out from here. And in certain seasons, you tinker with it a little bit more in one end than the other. But this is what we've been missing. How many shows have you done? Hey, what's our identity? It's Harbaugh's 4th year. I don't get what he's trying to do. They have managed to build this identity at the same time they've positioned themselves to play in the college football playoff for the first time in school history. And I think we as fans need to understand this is something that we're going to see them do continuously from here because of the foundation that's been laid, I believe.
No, I think you're dead on, Steve, and it's why, as Michigan football fans, we should be excited about the future of this program and what Jim Harbaugh has done. And I just think about how night and day it is from a year ago, and all the questions. And even after the Notre Dame game, we were asking if they're ever going to establish an offensive identity, if they're going to establish any type of team identity. They had the great defense, but they didn't have much of an offense. And you're right, it's a good moment, especially as they're heading into play Rutgers this weekend, to take a step back as fans and just say, like, okay, let's appreciate what Jim Harbaugh and these coaches and these players have built and developed in just a short amount of time, because it generally takes 3 or 4 years to get this, and they have been working towards that, but they've really done it all in about 9 months because they had to change so much from the quarterback position with the different wide receivers, all these these new offensive line starters, new coaching across the board. They've had to do so much construction. It's almost like maybe the last couple of years they built that foundation, and then all of a sudden this year they've gone from that foundation's been poured, and now that the house is it's almost complete. And so we're excited about the opportunity to move in and enjoy it the next couple of weeks. And certainly this weekend against Rutgers, you're going to have an opportunity to develop even more of that depth and more of that talent that's the younger years, and that'll pay off dividends later on in this season and certainly next season too, when you do have to replace some of those starters. So great place for Michigan football to be in right now, and really a great opportunity these next 2 weeks to build that next level of foundation for this program.
Michael Spath from Wolverine Digest, WTK Ann Arbor. Good to see you again, Michael. Thanks for joining us, brother. Go Blue.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steve.
If you want to keep up with what we think about the Wolverines all week long, aside from when we're doing this for Michigan Podcast, check us out at WolverineDigest.com or Wolverine Maven, part of the Maven Network, WolverineDigest.com. Myself and Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor, we keep you up to date with our commentary all week long. And one of the really cool things I love about how this site works is that the sidebar there, where we can give you, almost like a Mike Florio does at Pro Football Talk, where you can give you little mini updates via Twitter and other interactions, things that you probably want to know, be aware of, but don't require 500 to 700 word columns. I love that part of our website. It's a really easy, functional website to follow, WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, what was Michigan's most dominant victory in a November game against a ranked foe in recent memory? 52% of you said it was the victory over Penn State this past weekend. I would have voted for the victory over Penn State in 1997. Some smart Alex said, hey, that was 20 years ago. That's not recent memory. Well, dude, when you're 45 like I am, and you've gone right past the 4-head to the 5-head, and you got your own sheen going because you got so much exposed receding hairline, 20 years ago doesn't seem that long ago, dude. All right? Smart ass. All right, now, speaking of smart Alex, going to see a lot of this from some SEC media shills, Okay, let's go through some of the playoff and conference title scenarios. The Big Ten East, it's pretty simple. Michigan and Ohio State control their own destiny. If Ohio State loses before playing Michigan, like this party on Saturday, and I think they're going to, the Wolverines beat Rutgers in Indiana. Michigan will clinch the division before the game. Period. End of sentence. That's it. So what happens if there's like a 4-way tie for first in the Big Ten West at 6-3, like we are forecasting? At this point, all the tiebreakers in any scenario are pretty simple. And even in that convoluted conclusion, all Northwestern has to do is win 2 of its final 3 conference games, any 2 of its final 3 conference games, and Northwestern will be in Indianapolis. Now, if Northwestern loses to Iowa, like I think they will on Saturday, and then maybe loses on the road to Minnesota, and then plays Illinois, we're in flip-a-coin territory, okay? In the Pac-12 South, every team has 3 losses, but Arizona State is the only team that controls its own destiny. If the Sun Devils were to win out, they would win the division in Herm Edwards' first season. How about that for the much ridiculed coaching hire? In the Pac-12 North, Washington State and Washington each control its own destiny. If either wins out, it wins the division. And of course, they have the Apple Cup to face each other at the end of the season. And this year, that game is on the Palouse. In the SEC, Alabama and Georgia, they've already clinched their division titles. They will meet in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. In the Big 12, Oklahoma and West Virginia each control their own destiny, but also play the final week of the regular season. Since the league doesn't have divisions, that means they could end up playing the very next week in Dallas in the Big 12 title game. And Iowa State and Texas are both there very strong in contention in the Big 12 as well. They don't need much help to be in the conference title game. In the ACC, Clemson has already posted 2 of the league's most dominant conference wins in the last 20 years. If they win at Boston College on Saturday, game day will be there. They clinch the Atlantic. If Pitt beats Virginia Tech and Wake Forest, Pitt, which got 50 burgered by Penn State to start the year, will win the Coastal Division. So those are your conference title scenarios. Because we need an audience, and that bait ain't going to click itself. You're going to get some folks, particularly those who have a fiduciary association and interest with the Southeastern Conference, try to make the case that Michigan's not a guaranteed in if the Wolverines win out from here. That's not true. There is no way, no how, Michigan is not going to get into the college football playoff if it is 12-0, winning the Big Ten championship with only 1 loss. Not going to happen. Well, Steve, what if Alabama loses in the SEC championship game? Remember, the rationale last year was that Ohio State had 2 ugly losses. One at home to Oklahoma, the other on the road to Iowa, both by double digits. Michigan will have no such blemish on its record this year, losing by a touchdown at Notre Dame, the opening game of the year, who also looks like it's going to be in the playoff. It is hardly a bad loss, on top of the fact the schedule that Michigan is playing this year is superior to the schedule that Ohio State played and won with a year ago. So, no. It's not going to happen. Don't buy into it. Don't worry about it. Don't lose any sleep over it. And really, none of it's worthy of getting upset about anyway, unless Michigan does that. That's not a guarantee, guys. So, but no, in no universe, on no earth within the multiverse would that occur. It's just a bunch of SEC media shills who told us this offseason Harbaugh sucked, but was still a candidate for every NFL job. I don't understand that. I don't understand how he sucks, but the highest level of football wants him. Why would they want a crappy coach? Makes no sense. And that we were going to run fullback checkdowns with Shea Patterson, and we were going to lose 5 games. All right. So all those exact same people are the ones that are going to tell you it's not guaranteed. They're doing infotainment. You're not their audience. People that live in the southeastern region of the country are, and they're just giving them what they want. All right. And again, that bait ain't going to click itself. This week's question of the week comes from MC. Are you getting the tattoo? No, that is not a Fantasy Island reference. It is a reference to this ill-fated tweet, which I should not have made shortly before midnight on the 1st of September. But I did that because I was drunk on defeat to Notre Dame. And Greg Neva, one of our viewers, said Michigan will win 9 or 10 games. Give the Irish some credit. They're very good. And I responded back, because I was bitter and immature. If Michigan wins 10 regular season games this season, I will get a Harbaugh tramp stamp. It's happening. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, but I'm a man of my word. It'll happen. All right, hey, don't forget one last thing. Michigan men's basketball, as if I didn't sear that image, into the deep bowels and recesses of your brain. Michigan men's basketball, number 19 in the preseason AP poll, gets underway Tuesday night against Holy Cross. And then we're going to have more on this team next week because the Wolverines' very next game is a week from Wednesday, November the 14th, against Villanova in a rematch of the national championship. I want to thank our friends over at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to get the word out about this show every week. All of you that follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. You can also subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, etc. Leave us a 5-star review here on any of those podcast platforms, a positive review here on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, please, and read all of our analysis every day at WolverineDigest.com. Until then, go Blue.